Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Essentials for Cybersecurity in the Caribbean webinar. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this webinar. My name is Kamla Hamilton, and I am the Senior Product Manager for Security Solutions here at Cable & Wireless. And it is my utmost pleasure to be hosting this webinar to speak about something that is topical, to have some engaging discussion, and to bring to light what we have as C&W. I think it's going to be a very interesting and very dynamic conversation today. So take your seats if you're not seated, have your cup of coffee or your cup of tea, and let's go. So with us today, we have Mr. Gavin Dennis, who is the CEO, head bottle washer, white hat hacker, just everything cybersecurity and more from G5 Cybersecurity. And we will be engaging with him in conversation. Now, just before we get into the conversation at hand, let's just kind of paint the picture and give some context to the webinar for today. So the Caribbean is the focus and cybersecurity is the equal focus, because we've noted that there have been many attacks within the region, especially within this year, within last year, literally from the onset of the COVID pandemic. And we've noted that the number of attacks have just incrementally and exponentially been increasing year on year. And we've noted as well that the number of attacks that have been reported right across the board, which previously didn't happen, has been increasing. So even if you have not been keeping in tune with what is going on, someone must have told you that there has been an attack in this country or this particular company or whatever. So it's a topical issue that we need to discuss, and we at Cable & Wireless, it's one of our pillars in terms of services that we deliver, and we want to have that discussion with you today. So to delve into the conversation, Gavin, let us begin by talking about what's happening in the Caribbean, right? So from your perspective, what are the challenges that companies, organizations, government, people, just the whole spectrum face with regards to cybersecurity?
So right now, what's happening is that the attackers are relentless. They are being motivated by money, primarily channeling their energies into ransomware, because that's where they can attack a company, leave their ransomware note, encrypt their data, and in hopes that they can cash in on several millions if a company chooses to pay the ransom. So companies are now trying to battle with attackers who are working right around the clock versus, for them and their staff who typically work 9 to 5.
Well, that's very true, because hackers, as you say, they never sleep. They're working 24 hours. So what does it mean then for victims of these ransomware attacks, and not just corporate victims, but citizens of the Caribbean whose information is now leaked and available publicly on the web?
So on an individual level, right, we have personal data being dumped online. So we have people where their privacy is being affected because now people know their address, people have copies of their ID, people know their email address, and lots of personal information. So there's a big privacy risk that's happening right across the Caribbean. And although a lot of these Caribbean countries, they have data protection laws, a lot of those laws are not yet active. So the citizens themselves now have a big privacy challenge. Their personal data is out there. They're getting suspicious emails. They're getting suspicious calls. They're getting these weird text messages. They're losing money from their bank accounts because a lot of the information that's dumped, it's information that attackers can use to contact the bank and verify their identity. So people are losing money. People are losing their right essentially to privacy, because if their data is already out there, to specifically identify them and where they live, then a lot of what used to be private is no longer private anymore, and that can put a lot of people and their lives at risk.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. And I kind of want to delve into the fact that as I said, as I mentioned earlier, the number of attacks that we're facing in the Caribbean is increasing, exponentially. There was a report last year that stated in the first half of 2022, there were approximately 144 million attacks directed towards the Caribbean at large. And I mean, if you think about it exponentially, then by the end of the year, you would have been targeting probably over 300 million independent attacks towards the Caribbean. And we know that on average, there is a minimum of a 10% increase year on year in terms of the number of attacks. So it just means that by the end of 2023 and going into 2024, there could be close to, possibly 500 million attacks. And so with
And
this rising number, no, but it's the
those are
reality that we're
those are
living
the
in.
attacks. Those are the ones that get
Yeah,
recorded. Those are the ones. Imagine the ones
exactly.
where there isn't any system in place at that company to detect, that traffic. So that's just what gets captured.
And then that brings me to the next point about no. So from your perspective then, what is the general cybersecurity posture of the Caribbean? Taking in mind all the privacy things that you've mentioned, data protection, all of the increasing number of attacks then. From your perspective, what is today the regional cybersecurity posture of the Caribbean as a whole?
So, all right. So from my experience supporting companies across the Caribbean, so far the posture is a bit weak because culturally across the Caribbean, companies tend to be very reactive. So they wait until there's a confirmed breach before they start to do certain things like to get an EDR in place, to do vulnerability scans. Because what used to happen was a lot of companies, they tended to believe, Caribbean companies, they tend to believe that they were too small to be targeted. It used to be a very common thing that, oh, no one wants to target my business. It's a small business, it's a coffee shop, it's a this, it's a that. And they tend to believe that the Caribbean was not a viable target for these international hacking groups. But a lot of that has changed. The internet is essentially flat. There's no one who is off limits. There's no one who is too big or too small. So now everyone is on a level playing field, and it's about who is vulnerable, who can they compromise in hopes that they might be able to get a ransom, or they might be able to steal data that's useful enough that they can use elsewhere. And so everything is being interconnected, everything is going online. And as such, like the information that a small coffee shop would have is now very valuable to these hackers, because they can take that information and possibly go to a bank and convince the bank that they are this person. So it's no longer about whether the coffee shop itself is a conglomerate or is rich, because data is the key thing now. It's not just about money, it's about the value of the data that your business is holding.
Yeah, and I really love that point that you've made, because the currency today in cyber is the data. That is the
Data.
currency. That's the money. That's where it all resides. And so it's interesting that you're saying that the posture of the Caribbean companies right across the board, it's weak, it's a bit lax, and it needs some tending to. Because I know that, you did a recent study just looking at the website presence of
Yes.
companies, and so share some information, some tidbits there of what you found specifically.
All right. So one of the things that we did at G5 is we went through the internet and tried to identify as many Caribbean businesses that have a custom domain, right? Meaning that the company has bought a specific domain. They're not using, a free email service. They have a custom domain that they use for their email, for their website. And we looked at how many of these websites right across all countries and territories in the Caribbean. And we looked at these websites to see, from this entire population, how many of these websites automatically connect over HTTPS when a user visits. So when you type in the address in your browser, does it connect over HTTP or HTTPS, which is the secure version? So we automated that process. So instead of opening the browser each time, we automated that process using a script, and then collected all of that data to see how many of these websites are doing the bare minimum, meaning implementing HTTPS. So when their user visits, the connection between the web server and the browser is encrypted. And less than 50% of all of those websites are actually using HTTPS. And I mean, this is the kind of control that you can see. right? So if more than 50% is not using HTTPS, and this is something that the internet can see, their customers can see, you know, consider the things that are happening internally from a security perspective that you can't see, the things that don't get exposed. Because for me, HTTPS is almost the bare minimum you can do to show that, you know, at least to the public, that you care about cybersecurity. It's at least using HTTPS for your main company website. And so, you know,
Yeah.
we're finding that most businesses have not yet adopted that kind of practice.
Right. And as you said, we're seeing as well to that lack of adoption of, very basic security controls and practices for very specific services that companies have. It's more widespread, and it's more, inherent or intrinsic to the companies. So now that we kind of painted the picture of what is going on in the Caribbean, in terms of the attack, the general idea of the posture of companies that are out there, I just want to take a quick break to engage our audience to respond to the very first poll question of the webinar. So I just like you to take 30 seconds to just answer that first poll question, which is, how confident are you in your ability to recognize and avoid phishing attempts? So the numbers are spreading very quickly. Generally, most persons are very confident. So I think if there are any IT managers in the house, it could speak well to your training policies that you may have implemented within your organization. Okay. Well, thank you very much for answering that whole question. We will move on to, the basis of this webinar today. So understanding the context of cybersecurity in the Caribbean and where it is today, we want to discuss what we believe are the essentials of cybersecurity. And this is not a prescriptive list. This is not any way complete or conclusive, because you have to understand that depending on where your organization is in its maturity for cybersecurity, you could have already gone past these things that we're going to be discussing. But the point is, they are essential, and they are building blocks for the security controls that need to be embedded and integrated within organizations. So keeping that in mind, Gavin, for you now, what are the 5 essential cybersecurity that controls that companies should have?
All right, so let's start. So first up, we're looking at robust password policies. For almost everything that you're trying to log into, it usually requires a username or a user ID and a password. So you need to identify yourself, and that would be the username ID or user ID. And then you need to verify that you are really this person, which is the password. So ensuring that users who are connecting into your network and your various systems are using strong passwords is going to be key. And strong meaning that the password is hard to guess, and that can be using a combination of ensuring that the password is reasonably long. So at a minimum, 8 characters based on industry practices. Ensuring that the passwords themselves are using a mixture of numbers, characters, uppercase, lowercase, etc., symbols, to ensure that it is really hard to guess. And in some cases, you might have to block some passwords that might even meet those criteria, but are also known to be easily guessable passwords. For example, password 1 exclamation, right? Which tends to meet the length of 8. It has all of the symbols, but it's known to be a very well-known password. So the essential one is to ensure that robust passwords are being used. Password manager also helps in this case, because it ensures that your staff doesn't get fatigued by trying to remember all of the different passwords that they're using online, internally. So adopting a password manager across the company should help in terms of ensuring that your staff is using complex passwords, and that they are not, getting tired, and cause of that fatigue, starting to set weak passwords.
Okay, and how does multi-factor authentication play into a robust password policy?
So here's the thing with multi-factor. When you're logging into a system normally, all you need is a username and a password. What multi-factor does is to add an additional layer. So for a lot of the persons here, your company might be using something like Microsoft 365 for email and all of the different services, Teams, etc., which a lot of us are very familiar with. Now, when they're logging into their account, in addition to providing their company username and their password, they would need to provide a code from their multi-factor tool. That can be through a mobile app, it can be through a Windows application, essentially, or even a hard token. What happens is this code changes every 30 seconds. So in addition to knowing the username and password, they would be required to either manually approve on their phone, so it pushes a notification to their phone and they can approve, or it can ask them to enter this one-time code to allow them to get into the account. So it adds a very strong layer of security on top of the typical username and password. So even if their password is stolen by some unusual means, maybe someone saw their password, maybe they were tricked into clicking a phishing link, that additional layer of providing that multi-factor token is going to significantly reduce the risk of someone unauthorized getting into one of your company's accounts.
Okay, wonderful. And the point about layers of security is crucial and essential to driving that security posture within an organization because, defense in depth is one of the better ways to protect yourself against these cyber attacks because you have many layers going through. So let's move on now to the second essential.
All right, so number 2 on the list, regular software updates and patch management. So whenever I do a pen test or we do a vulnerability scan, the primary thing with the vulnerabilities that pop up is they are often tied to a specific version of the software. So as time passes, there are people out there who get paid to find bugs, to find security vulnerabilities, and they are often very specific to a version. So when we are doing exploits or even when we're looking for exploits online, exploits are often tied to a very specific version. So they will say this exploit works for version 1.2. Now the vendors receive that update and then they create a patch. Then they push those patches as software updates and the company is expected, or people are expected to download the updates, install them, and that would fix the issue. So ensuring that you have a patch management solution in place to keep your software up to date is one of the things that will significantly reduce the risk of one of your software, whether it's the operating system level or it's an application itself that's installed on a machine. Having a patch management solution to ensure that you're keeping all of your software up to date will significantly reduce your risk of a compromise.
Yeah, and I can't help but underscore that because we've seen in cases where we've done incident remediation and recovery with customers where they've had vulnerabilities that have been known, that are known and are years old, right? And they just don't have the mechanism in place to have that automated patch management. And more often than not, that is the gateway for the breach and for the exfiltration of data and all of those other things that happen. And to know, it leads us to the third essential point, which I think is just as crucial and important as the two that you've mentioned before.
Employee training and awareness. So training our staff. Now, there's this very popular saying that says they're talking about companies where a manager says, if we train them, they will leave, right? But if you don't train them and they stay, then what? Right? So it comes down to ensuring that your staff is adequately trained and tested so that they can be conscious in how they do their jobs and can do it in a secure way. Oftentimes you might hear that staff is considered as the weakest link in the security chain, right? And although I don't believe that it's true that they are the weakest, I do believe that they are a weak link if you do not train them. So let's say you have your team, they're going about, they're doing their job, and someone calls them or sends them an email or a text message trying to trick them into giving up some type of confidential info or to take an action like clicking a link, opening a file that might be malicious. And this is how a lot of companies also get infected. Now, with training your staff, you have to ensure that they are conscious of the various ways that people will attempt to trick them and the kind of risks that they shouldn't be taking online. So helping them to understand how to securely browse the web, right? How to scrutinize emails that they receive from people, whether these are emails from people they know, people they don't know. In one case, I remember getting an email from a company that was compromised, right? The CEO's email was used to send out a phishing link to everyone in his contacts. The first thing that prompted my attention is that the attachment I received was an HTML file. Now, that's just very unusual. People don't send out HTML files to other people as something that they should open. So immediately, I knew that something was off. Now, I've received an email from this person before, sure. So it's not a stranger, but still, an HTML attachment, that was very, very, very strange. And it turned out that it's because they were hacked. Now, there are lots of different ways how your staff could be tricked into attempting to take an action or such as clicking a link, opening an attachment, or through social engineering. In one case, much in the past, I'd say about 2-3 years ago, I did a physical penetration test on a company. I was a part of a team that did a physical pen test, and I was sent in to trick a staff member to give me their system unit. Right, I went in, I was able to chat up the staff, I was able to chat up the manager, the security, went in, told them that I was from the head office, right? This is one of their branches. I was from the head office. I'm here to take X person's machine. I told them I was an intern, so I didn't have an ID. And I was able to talk to them and get her to give me her computer system, and I was able to walk out of the company. Now, these forms of things, they happen in different ways, but ensuring that your employees are trained and also tested. So things like that would be a test. And I'm sure that's an event that they didn't forget. So things like that are very good to test their knowledge through either simulated phishing emails, through those physical pen tests, having people come in and trying to trick them into giving up access to certain confidential areas or files. But you have to educate your staff and train them so that as these various approaches come in from all of the tricksters and the scammers, they would be conscious and aware that something about this situation is off, and they would know the appropriate action to take and who to contact. And in that specific incident, one of the things that the team failed to do, they failed to verify who I was. They failed to contact IT. They failed to call their head office to see if they had really sent me out there. They failed to do that, and they took my word for it because I was able to give them just some information that made it appear as if I knew about the company. So I must have worked there. So training them will ensure that your staff is aware and conscious of how to react in these situations.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, that I hope is reverberating with the audience here, because if you also remember that massive Sony attack some time ago, which was at that time one of the largest, it was simply a similar thing. Someone just walked onto the compound and just got direct access to the server room. Just literally walked in because persons didn't query, they didn't question, they just person walked with authority in, and they got in, and then we know how that story unfolded. So the key point here as well is that the human shield is just as important as the technology and administrative shields that you put in place in terms of policies and procedures. And so moving now to a little bit more of the technology, we're going to look at, how do we secure the network? Why is that important?
All right, so essential 4, securing network configurations. Now, your network is made up of multiple systems. You have your routers, you have your switches, you might have a firewall, you have your servers, you have your end user machines, you might even have tablets and mobile phones and things like that. Now, the network devices are essentially the backbone of your network. It's what allows each department to communicate with the other and for you to also communicate with the internet. So ensuring that the backbone of your network is secure, meaning that your network devices That's also going to be essential. And remember, we're focusing on the key areas. There are lots of the various aspects of security that should be implemented, but we're cutting it down to the 5 essential things that you should focus on. Now, we have the network configurations. So now you have your firewalls, your routers, switches, etc. We have to ensure that these devices are being hardened to at least the international or industry standards. This might mean that you will need to do an assessment to understand what settings are in place now versus which settings are missing versus which settings need to be modified and improved. And this is very common when we go into a company and support them. We go in, they give us a set of devices, which might be Windows systems, servers, network devices, and these are things that are already set up, they're already working, everything is going fine, they're functioning. But these devices are often not hardened based on the international standards that are established on how you should harden this specific type of firewall with this specific router. But before you can know that, you have to do an assessment, because you don't know what's going wrong until you check. You don't know what's missing. You don't know what's not set up properly. So doing an assessment to understand where you are now, to identify your gaps. And then once you identify those gaps, you then talk to your implementation team, your IT team, whoever that might be, to ensure that these settings are modified. But you have to assess all devices across your network to ensure that they are sufficiently hardened, they are secured to international standards, and you're protecting the backbone of your network.
Right. And one of the things, once again, I'm just simply underscoring everything that Gavin is saying. But what we also recognize in some customer environments is that they go ahead and they do that at an initial step, and that's the only time they ever conduct that type of hardening or ensuring that the network configuration is correct at that one point or period in time, and it doesn't become a recurring activity within an organization. And that is where everything begins to go or to descend, because the fact is this: cybersecurity is not a static thing, or the promulgation of good cybersecurity practices within an organization is not a static activity. It's a constant, it's an ongoing, recurring, cyclic activity. You have to be constantly looking at your posture, seeing what needs to be hardened, seeing what needs to be assessed. It's an ongoing thing, right? So as we move to the last essentials, Gavin.
Yes. So data backup and recovery. Now, you might have seen, in the news that quite a bit of ransomware incidents and news of companies being hacked have been, floating right around the media. What happens now with a lot of these incidents, they are typically ransomware attacks, meaning that a company was infected with malware that locked their files, and the attackers are demanding money to give the company access back to their files. Now, in some of these cases, what I've found from even supporting companies is that not all companies have proper backups. And so when their files get infected and the attackers are demanding money, they often do not have the money to pay, but they also do not have the backups to use to recover. So now they're between what's considered a rock and a hard place, right? Where they don't have the money to pay the large ransom that's being demanded by the attackers, but they don't have the data to also restore and continue working. So they often end up with no choice of wiping the systems and starting over. And sometimes that's a very, very hard thing to do because of the kind of data that's going to be lost if you have to wipe and start over. That could be a week, could be a month worth of data, it could be years. Some cases, companies have lost years of data because they didn't have a proper backup. There are also some other cases where they do have a backup, but they didn't test it. And when they try to do the restoration, the backup failed. So testing the backups that you have is also going to be essential. So first, ensure that you're taking backups of your key, the critical data, the data that you cannot afford to lose. And if you have the luxury, you can take a backup of all of the data that you're generating so that in any case, you'd be able to restore like nothing happened. So that is one. Testing the backups that you're taking is going to be the next thing. So you're taking the backups, yes, periodically testing that the restoration works. So take a sample of that data, attempt to restore it, see if you run into any problems. Because sometimes, because you've never tried to do a restoration, you don't know that there are some little hiccups that you'll run into. You don't know what to anticipate. You don't know how long the backup process actually takes compared to how long you need that backup to be up and running. So recovery, ensuring that you have the backups, ensure they're being tested, and then doing the recovery whenever you run into certain incidents where you have no choice but to do a recovery. You need to be able to put your business in a position where it can recover, it can bounce back, right? Whenever there are, these unwanted and unfortunate cybersecurity incidents.
Yeah, and I love that bounce back talking about the resiliency of organizations, because that's also a critical and focal point that needs to be considered when you are looking at your cybersecurity posture. Your ability to bounce back and to minimize disruptions to your business in the event of you facing an attack. Because let's just be very practical about it. These essentials are not going to suddenly prevent the 144 million attacks that we spoke about from just suddenly vanishing into thin air and stopping. No, that's not going to happen, right? Because there's no such thing as 100% cybersecurity proof, right? You can follow the standards, follow the practices, engage with C&W and have portfolio of services, and it does not prevent attacks from happening. What it will do is that it will minimize the disruption. It will provide you with ways in which to detect these attacks earlier so that you can take the necessary mitigation steps and lessen the disruption time, lessen, all of these things. So I hope you have a good idea of some of the essentials of, cybersecurity steps that need to be taken by us as Caribbean organization. And so now what we want to do is to give you a very practical view of how these essential steps will help or how they can be manipulated by hackers. But just before we go to the demo, we have our second poll question for you. So on the heels of us identifying these essentials, we'd love to know from your perspective which ones are the most, or which one is, the most challenging for organizations in the Caribbean to implement. Okay. So I think the audience is quite aware that their employees need to be trained, but it's challenging to have an adequate program in place. But not to worry. This is just one of the many services that we have within our portfolio. So Gavin, are you ready now?
I would say so.
All right,
so,
let's
so
kick it.
everyone we'll be running a demo to help you see what it's like when someone attempts to exploit a Windows system that's on your network that is unpatched, that is known to be vulnerable, and that has functional exploits that are out there online.
And also has a password, Kamla123.
Ah, yes. So we will be running that right about, I'll be sharing shortly. So everyone, what I'll be doing is we have a file here. Let's say we have, Data Protection Act. Let's say you have files on your companies called invoices. Let's say you have other forms of things on your company's machine. Let's say you have payroll, right? Database files, etc. Now we have a machine here that's running Windows 7, and we have the IP address here of 192.168.192.129. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be using or attempting to use our hacking machine to exploit a vulnerability called Bluekeep. Bluekeep was a vulnerability published in 2019 that affected a lot of Windows machines, especially Windows 7. Now, across the Caribbean, we found that there are lots of companies that are still running Windows 7 machines, and it also affects others. Still running outdated operating systems, unsupported operating systems. And here you're seeing that we're going to attempt to exploit that vulnerability. And fingers crossed, from our demo, it works. So here we're in a tool called Metasploit. And this is running inside the popular hacking operating system called Kali Linux. So you have Windows, you have Kali Linux, which is a Linux-based operating system, and it's used primarily by hackers. So a lot of times when you hear of companies getting hacked, they are using operating systems similar, and in most cases, probably Kali Linux. So we're going to just confirm that we've set up our target, meaning that we know that this is the machine that we are going to be targeting. So here you'll see our host, which is remote host 192.168.192.129. So we've set it. The ports that we're targeting is 3389, which is RDP. And we will attempt to connect to the Windows 7 machine by exploiting the vulnerability, the vulnerability which we have an exploit here staged specifically for Bluetooth. So let's go and see if everything will run successfully. So on screen, what you're looking at is what it looks like when an exploit is run, right? So you're looking at this history, which shows that we sent the request to that vulnerable machine, and we now have a command prompt, right? So if I run any kind of command here, like ls is the command in Linux to say list files, right? We can connect to the system. We're reading everything that's there. So here I'm going to show you that we're in that Windows system. So we are at Windows System 32. And if I say, let's go to say, let's browse to the main Windows folder, right? Here are the list of files. So we're in the C drive. And I don't know if you remember earlier when I copied some files into the machine. So if we go to say users, we list the users to see what users exist. The user that I'm logged into on the Windows machine is called test. So we're going to go into the folder for the user test. We're going to list all files that are there. Here we're seeing my documents. We're seeing all of these different files. So we're going to go into downloads and we're going to list the files. And here are the files that I had copied in the system earlier. Now, this is what attackers see. There are several things that we can do with this tool. We can take screenshots. We can take screenshots of the machine. Here you're seeing that we just took a screenshot. It saved it in our folder. So if I go into my machine now and I look, you'll see the screenshots that's here. This is the file that was just taken. This is the image. So this is the desktop, right? If we go over to the Windows machine, that's the same desktop that's there. And I can also upload files. So let's say I have malware. Let's say I'm an attacker and I have malware in my hacking machine and I want to get it into this system that I've just compromised, right? One of the things that we can do, we have a file here called ransomware, right? We can also upload. So let's say, it's a beginner, they don't necessarily know what they're doing. All of these hacking tools, they come with lots of commands to help people understand what they can do. So if you have a staff member that is motivated enough, this could be a disgruntled staff member, it could be a technical IT person who has either resigned from the company, they believe they're unfairly dismissed, but people are disgruntled for different ways. A lot of these tools come with various help menus, etc., to show you what you can do, right? So just scrolling through just to help you understand what it's like behind the scenes. So let's say we are going to upload. We have a file called ransomware, right? So we have that file called ransomware, and we're going to upload it into the machine. Here, we've just uploaded our ransomware.exe, right? We've just uploaded it into the Windows machine. So if we go now and we say ls to list the files that are on the Windows machine, you can now see that there's a file called ransomware. Now, to execute that ransomware, all we do is just call the file and we're able to execute it. We can also kill tasks. So let's say you have your antivirus software on your machine, you have different things. We have built-in functions that we can use to kill a task that is running on the Windows machine. So let's jump over to the Windows machine here. Let's hope it will stay stable enough. And here you can see the executable called ransomware.exe. And we can create other files. So we can download files. So we can say download, right? And we can say we want to download everything. And this is how they will steal the files that are on your machine. So here you're seeing that it's reading all of the files that are there, invoices.pdf, Data Protection Act, payroll.pdf, the same files that are here, and it's downloading them into our attacking machine. So if I go into my attacking machine now, you'll see that I've downloaded all of the files. Now, this is an example of if your operating systems or just the systems on your network are vulnerable and they have various exploits that are out there, people within your company can attempt to exploit these machines. And now if you look in our Windows 7 machine, there's nothing that's popping up. There's nothing that's there to indicate that something unusual is happening. Whoever is logged into this machine, they can continue working as normal and they would have no idea that someone has a backdoor into their system and is downloading files. They might notice an unusual file that was created on their system. They might not. There are lots of places that we could have uploaded this ransomware file to, other than the downloads folder. We could upload it somewhere that the user would never be visiting, like somewhere in the C drive, in like the Windows folder on the C drive. So this is just an example. And if we go back to the help command here, we can look at all of the different types of things that we can do. We can capture keystrokes, so we can run a keylogger on that machine, right? And as someone is typing on their Windows machine, we are capturing everything as they type. We can enable the mic. If there's a webcam that's attached to this machine, we can capture video from the webcam without the person knowing. Right, so here you're seeing start capturing keystrokes. So we can say key scan start. And as the person is typing in their Windows machine, whatever it is that they're typing, we will be capturing everything. We've already taken a screenshot, basic things. We can turn off the machine. We can kill processes. So here you see you can shut down the machine. If this was a server and a very critical server in your company, we would be able to shut down certain operations, right? We can reboot it. We can kill a process with pkill. We can do lots of different things. So the overall thing that I want you to take away is what it looks like behind the scenes when some of these exploits happen. You will see these things on TV, right? And some of them do work like that in reality. Some are take a bit more time. Some are, you have to jump through a few more hoops. But the fact is that there can be someone who's on your network who can be your own staff, who are doing things like that, running exploits, deleting files, moving directories, just lots of things. And let's say in one very wild scenario, let's say you didn't have certain controls in place, you've never done a security assessment. Someone could use the same type of backdoor to wipe your server, right? To delete all files that are there. So there are lots of things that can be done. It really just comes down to the creativity of the hacker. It really just comes down to the creativity of the hacker and what they are intending to do. So I'll hand it over back to Kamla, but this is just to give you an example that we have full command line access into this machine, and anything that your IT administrator can do, we can also do from our attacking machine here. Over to you, Kamla.
Yeah, Gavin, thank you. Thank you for that. It was very exciting, an exciting demo in all spheres. And I just want to point out that when Gavin was mentioning the we, he was just putting himself in the place of an attacker, not saying that he's the one that's actually doing these things, all right? So he was just
although we do pen tests.
Yeah,
we do pen tests.
do that in terms of pen tests and vault tests. Exactly. Well, I just want to make sure that persons don't think that you're have some type of, multiple personalities or personas going on here. So I think that kind of clearly demonstrated once we were able to get back that demo that, the essentials, particularly unpatched devices, it's a critical, entry point or potential breach point that can be exploited by attackers that are out there. And remember, for every one of us that, is trying to be the good guy, protecting systems, protecting organizations, there are thousands of bad actors out there that are just 100% coming for us, right? So we need to companies in the Caribbean, they need to take a very strategic and tactical approach to cybersecurity. And I can't overemphasize that we here at Cable Wireless, in terms of our cybersecurity portfolio and the offerings that we have that in mind. And our portfolio of services provides the layers of security, the defense in depth. We not only take, the internal resources in terms of expertise and capabilities that we have, but we partner as well with providers of cybersecurity technology expertise like Gavin and others. So, we want to have meaningful conversations with you because it is our mandate right now to ensure that, the Caribbean is protected, right? So as we're coming to the close of the session today, I think the last thing I want to kind of discuss here, Gavin, is, having given us that very practical demonstration, and as I mentioned before, the emerging trends of attacks interspersed with AI in 30 seconds, what is your outlook for 2024 going into 2025 in terms of cybersecurity, the attacks, how they will, manifest themselves and so on?
So what I'm anticipating based on also what I'm seeing now as the trend is more ransomware attacks. Right? I'm getting quite a bit of calls for companies who have been infected with ransomware, and that's where I see the trend continuing because it's a very lucrative angle for attackers because the primary goal is to get money. It's not just the data. They take the data, yes, and they will dump it if you do not pay the ransom, and that's their threat. But also the possibility of making several million US dollars from a single company each time they are compromised with ransomware. That is where I see the big trend in terms of attackers and what they are going to be primarily focusing on. There are lots of different things you can do. You can cause a system to crash. You can just steal data. You can, there are lots of different things, but primarily attackers are going to be focusing on deploying ransomware and hoping they can get a payout.
Right. And I mean, on that note, that just fits perfectly into one of the services that we have at Cable and Wireless in terms of managed endpoint protection using EDR capabilities that have machine learning, AI, I mean, the whole gamut of stuff that we want to have the conversation with you. So I would just love to thank you, Gavin, for your input, for the information that you have shared. I'd love to thank as well our audience that sat through all the exciting ups and downs of our presentation today. Thank you for your time. And I will also invite you, to utilize the link that will be shared with you afterwards, so that we can have some more meaningful conversations. Because, as I said, we intend to, go about protecting the companies of the Caribbean. And I'd also like to thank as well the production team, Danny and team back office that supported this webinar. So I do hope that you found this to be an informative session, a good use of your 62 minutes of time. I thank you all for joining and have a lovely rest of the day.
All right, thanks everyone.